Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a cupcake with a cherry on top, otherwise known as a Warframe guide. And remember, before we start off with this intrepid adventure, to follow me on Twitch and Twitter, because I do this now because people don't watch to the end of the video. Yeah, follow me on Twitch for daily streams for Warframe and other games, and generally have a good time, and if you want to join us with the making these videos especially. And follow my Twitter for daily art that is definitely safe for work and updates to when we're streaming and stuff. Yeah, go do that stuff. Do it now. There'll be links down below. You all seen it. You've probably all played it by this point. But the recent mainline has really rustled up some jimmies in the world of Warframe and the world of damage within Warframe. And for those who maybe have just started playing Warframe for the first time and are wondering why their damage ain't damaging like it used to, sorry. DE like to change things quite a lot. And with the recent changes, they really tried rustling up the old systems that have been quite antiquated. Yeah, that's the word. And basically, DE have revised a lot of the old systems to make them more modern and generalized, which we'll talk a bit more about in a bit. And really, these systems that have gone untouched for a while have needed a change. The statuses are kind of in that line as well, and have kind of been the more controversial thing they've changed, but in some ways it has been a good thing. And you're probably all wondering, how does status work now? Well, in this video, I'm going to do a very quick, concise explanation of every status, what they're good for, why they're good, and what they're good against, and what they may not be good for. So if you're looking to learn more about statuses, this will be the video for you. And this video will also be just over 10 minutes long because I've got to make that damn mid-roll money, baby. So, statuses, what are they? Well, status effects are, quite simply put, elemental types that when afflicted to an enemy will cause different effects to said enemy. The chance of that status effect affecting an enemy is then based off the status chance of the weapon you equip. Faster weapons generally can utilize a lower status chance because they're hitting much faster and will then thusly have more chances to inflict their status chance. Bigger weapons will likely need a higher status chance to guarantee a proc on the hit because they're hitting slower. But we're not here to get into the nitty-picky of all that guff. That's a different video. You'll see that video eventually. We're instead going to now list off all the status procs and what they do and why they're good. Bearing in mind, you have the baseline elements, which are the following. Toxin, cold, electricity, and fire. These can not only sound like Captain Planet's summoning call sign, but they are also then elements that can be combined in your modding to create duo elements or combined elements. For an accurate depiction on how to achieve these combos and how they interact with each other, I'll have a handy dandy diagram appear on the screen now, and we'll explain more about the combos later in detail. It's also worth mentioning when modding that your modding screen will always take the elements into consideration from top left to top right, then from bottom left to bottom right. So making sure you put your mods in the right order will be important for getting the combos you want. And that's probably going to explain why your build hasn't worked for a while. Isn't that right, Jimmy? With most weapons, you can attain 2 combo elements at any given time, but you'll need to make sure there is the right order for it to work effectively. Otherwise, the algorithm will get confused, you'll get confused, and you'll probably punch your monitor like that one Twitch streamer.
Getting offline, guys. Later.
Yes, anyway, you always want to keep into consideration as well that elements on ribbons will still be taken into consideration in the order you put things. So you might need to fiddle around with your builds to get the right combo you'll want. And really, when it comes down to it, making the best builds are usually the ones that utilize the best combo of status effects with the decent amount of build mechanics. But that's enough of that. We're going to start out with the slightly less fundamental status types, which up until now have gone a bit underappreciated, which are the IPS statuses. Originally, where these were never much of a focus, but the recent mainline, as with most Warframe's content recently, has generalized these statuses quite considerably. So rather than just having 1 or 2 elements being the big focus, now all the statuses are pretty damn potent in their own right. And I would like to emphasize, I'm not here to convince you to mod for one status type or another. We just want to let you know what each of these statuses does and how they can best benefit you. Although I would like to point out that the IPSs are still not not quite as needed to be modded for as the actual elements themselves. The elements tend to be far more vital to a build than the IPS mods. So really, you just let the IPS speak for itself in a weapon, and then you just mod directly for the element instead. But then that comes down to a modding ideology, and that's a different video as well. I've got a video on that. Go watch that video. So the first element that we're looking at in the IPS is impact. By the way, IPS stands for impact puncture slash. It's just convenient. Impact causes the target afflicted to take a small stagger, effectively interrupting and crowd controlling the enemy. Impact deals 25% bonus damage to machine enemies, so for things like mowers and ospreys, it's ideal. Although it is worth mentioning that clone flesh enemies, which mostly consist of the lower armored Grineer targets, will take 25% less damage from impact. Puncture damage will reduce enemy damage dealt by 30% for 6 seconds once afflicted, which in essence can allow a puncture build to act as a kind of support role, helping reduce incoming damage for your team. Additionally, enemies with ferrite armor, which consists mostly of heavily armored Grineer targets, will take an increased amount of damage from this as well. Slash has always been the go-to when it comes to the IPS, as it is a very powerful bleed effect. And with the generalization, it's still quite about as powerful as it's ever been, but it's now more in line with everything else. And it's still probably the most potent, I would say, out of the IPS damage types. This nasty bleed is then based on the power of the damage dealt, so the higher the base damage of the weapon that's dealt with, the higher the bleed damage will tick for. This then deals 25% bonus damage to unarmored enemies, and less to those with armor. So with the IPS elements out of the way, we're now going to look at the actual elemental element statuses. Starting with cold damage, and boy are things getting chilly, cause it's cold in here. Cold damage will reduce enemy movement speed, attack speed, and fire rate by 25% for 6 seconds, and deals 25% bonus damage to alloy-plated enemies. This is probably the lesser of the initial elements, but when combined with others, it is stupidly powerful. Electricity. Ever heard that song with the name High Voltage by Electric Six? Well, electric damage, much like the song title, deals high voltage shocks to enemies within 3 meters of the target and stuns them for 3 seconds, basically acting as a crude crowd control and decent damage AoE to enemies within a small vicinity. The damage of the shocks is based then 50% of the base damage of the initial hit. The damage then dealing 50% bonus damage to machinery targets and 50% less to alloy enemies. Alloy enemies, really there aren't too many of them, so it's not too much to worry about in terms of the enemies that are resistant to this. Heat damage is another kind of damage over time, which ticks for 350% of the base damage dealt over 6 seconds. Additionally, it fears the enemy for 4 seconds and reduces the enemy armor in the process as well, dealing 25% bonus damage to regular clone flesh enemies, i.e. most of the Grineer enemies even. Toxin damage. Similar to heat damage, it is a status that deals damage over time. Toxin damage deals a flat 450% base toxin damage tick over 6 seconds. So it's generally considered one of the more higher damaging base elements. And one of the great things of unlike slash damage that no longer gets to bypass shields, toxin damage does bypass shields. Toxin then dealing 25% bonus damage to ferrite enemies and a reduced 25% to machine targets. And now the combined elements. These offer a much more visceral reward for putting effort into your builds. These combined elements also generally hit much harder too and offer a much more interesting dynamic to the status effect they deal to the enemy. Starting with blast damage. Blast is what you get when you combine heat and cold damage, and is probably one of the lesser of the combined elements in terms of overall potency, causing affected enemies to have their accuracy reduced by 30% for 6 seconds, and deals 75% bonus damage to machinery targets and 25% less to ferrite enemies. Most notably, this is ideal for bosses like the Ambulances and Raptors and any machinery bosses in general, which there are a fair number of, especially with the Corpus tile sets. Corrosive damage is a combination of electricity and toxin damage. Really, corrosive has not really changed in its purpose with the main line. Corrosive will still reduce armor by 26% for 8 seconds and serves as an ideal basis for missions where you don't know whether other people will bring corrosive projection or not. And although it's not as effective as corrosive projection by itself, it definitely aids in a team utility where you want to soften up enemies. Softening up the enemy for your team to then mash down, that is. Additionally, its effects ferrite covered enemies for an additional 75% bonus damage. Gas is then a combination of heat and toxin damage being put in a room together and told to get along. Spoiler, they didn't. And in so doing, you make a damage type that might not really be yearned for anymore. I mean, anyway, gas damage deals 50% less damage to cloned enemies, and that's it. Okay. Well, I mean, its effect is at least half decent, creating a cloud of smoke that deals 450% base damage to enemies within the cloud for 6 seconds. So if you want to kind of lay traps and allow enemies to walk into a fart bubble, then that's kind of what you use gas damage for. Magnetic damage is probably one of the most specialized of these combined element damage types, created with cold and electric being mushed together and molded into one. This damage will amplify all damage to shields by 100% for 6 seconds, and also prevents shield regenerations. So no surprise, this damage type is specifically good for fighting corpus type enemies. Radiation is another of the more sought after damage types, especially for things like Eidolon fights, and does have an element of difficulty to understanding exactly what it does. But for general semantics, it's there for causing mayhem. Radiation is a mixture of electricity and heat damage, and causes the enemy to become confused for 12 seconds, causing said enemy, in layman's terms, to attack the other enemies within its vicinity and friendly fire them for 100% bonus damage on top of their initial damage they would normally deal, thus creating a massive mosh pit between all the enemies you deal. So really, if you want to make the most of this damage type, bring something that can affect a lot of enemies in a short period of time. And last but not least, the coup de grace of elements and what used to be one of the most potent, Viral. Viral is probably the element that's changed the most with the main line, and really shows the pinnacle of how generalizing the damage types has gone, as it is no longer the be-all and end-all that it used to be. No, now it's much more in line with the potency of the others. This now acts as a vulnerability exposer, causing enemies afflicted to take 100% additional damage for 6 seconds, and is a combo of toxin and cold damage. You can also then be stacking this multiple times on the enemy, allowing them to take increasingly more damage. Honestly, this is still one of the best to go for, and will work on almost any enemy type, and should always be utilized if you're looking for something that will guarantee good results. So that's the statuses. They've changed somewhat. Some of them still more or less the same they've ever been. Some have been radically changed, like Viral. But for the most part, the fundamentals on the statuses is the same. You want to prioritize getting good combinations, and you want to prioritize making them as strong as possible. Utilizing them within hybrid builds is going to be the pinnacle of how you get the most out of them. And then before that, you'll prioritize working on the specific builds of either crit builds or status builds. But at no point is modding for an element a bad thing, because it's going to be adding direct damage to your weapon. So if you have found this video useful, please leave a like, and comment down below as to which element combo is your most used in the general semantics of Warframe. And hopefully, if you have liked this video, we'll see you in the next guide. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time, guys. Ta-ra!